When the sun slipped behind the horizon in the prehistoric world, it didn't just mark the end of a hard day, it signaled the beginning of the real danger. The kind of danger with glowing eyes, padded feet, and breath that steamed in the cold night air. For the first humans, darkness didn't bring rest. It brought predators. So before you enjoy the story, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel, but only if you really like what I'm doing here. And if you're watching from somewhere wild, let me know where you are and what time it is. Hopefully, it's not just after sunset. Now, turn up the volume and together let's begin today's journey of exploration. The wind is cold. The fire crackles. A small band of early humans, half-naked, huddled under mammoth hides, circle tighter around flickering flames. Beyond the firelight, there's movement. Not imagined. Real. A twig snaps. A breath whispers. And suddenly, the oldest member of the group grips a sharpened stick. Not to hunt, but to survive. This was the nightly reality for our ancestors. They weren't the apex predators of their time. Not yet. Not always. In many places, they were the prey, especially when the world went dark. There were no fences. No flashlights, no safety in numbers when the numbers were small. And the beasts that prowled after dark? They weren't the friendly kind of cats who knock things off shelves. They were the kind with teeth like daggers and night vision that could see you blink from 30 paces. Let's start with the sounds. Imagine lying on your back in a shelter of sticks and hides, trying to sleep. And somewhere in the woods, not far off, you hear a low growl. A guttural, vibrating rumble that travels through the ground. You don't know the species, but your spine knows to shiver. That growl could be from Homotherium, the saber-toothed cat. Smaller than the better-known Smilodon, but faster, leaner, and possibly hunting in packs. Yes, that's right, packs. Some researchers believe Homotherium may have been social, like wolves. Now picture a pack of prehistoric cats with slicing teeth and teamwork moving through the forest as quietly as mist. Suddenly, your campfire doesn't seem quite big enough. Our ancestors weren't just afraid of fangs. Some threats didn't roar or growl, they slithered. In warmer regions, prehistoric humans had to contend with massive constrictors like the Giganophus, an ancestor of the modern anaconda, rumored to have stretched over 30 feet. No one knows for sure how often humans crossed its path, but would you risk a nap by a jungle riverbank? And let's not forget the noise you didn't hear. The predators that stalked best were the ones who let you hear them after it was too late. One misstep, one crunch of leaves, and something exploded from the darkness, claws first. It's not hard to see how early humans became obsessive firemakers. Fire was the only thing that made the night even remotely fair. Here's a weird detail, some prehistoric tribes used animal dung as a deterrent. Not just to fertilize or cook over, no, they believed that scattering certain kinds of predator dung around the camp kept other beasts away. One theory? Crocodile poop. Apparently, nothing ruins the appetite of a saber-toothed predator like the smell of another alpha's bathroom break. There's a certain irony in imagining early humans inventing the world's first scented security system, but even fire and smell couldn't guarantee safety. Ice shone just beyond the firelight. Some stared for hours before striking. Others waited until a child wandered too far for a drink, or when the last of the meat was being packed up at dusk. Predators didn't care about fairness, they cared about timing. The fear of the dark, still rooted in many of us today, didn't come from fairy tales. Came from real things. Things that watched us breathe. Things that could run faster, bite harder, and vanish into the bush without a sound. Survival wasn't just about tools, it was about instincts. And so, stories were born. Around the fires, elders spoke of the beasts that hunted them, passing on knowledge laced with terror. Don't sleep near the water. Never go out alone after sunset. And always keep the fire burning. That torch you see in movies, the one someone bravely carries into a dark cave, that wasn't for lighting the way. That was a lifeline. A warning. A barrier. To them, it wasn't light. It was stay alive. Imagine being a child in this world. No night lights. No bedtime lullabies. Your lullaby was the sound of your mother sharpening sticks and the rhythmic snapping of burning wood. It's no wonder prehistoric humans had such deep respect and sometimes worship for the beasts they shared the world with. You don't spend thousands of years avoiding something and not end up carving its image into every cave wall. One of the earliest known cave paintings in El Castillo, Spain, shows red ochre shapes and outlines that are believed to be older than 35,000 years. Among them, predators. Not because humans loved them, but because they needed to remember them. Because knowing what could kill you was a matter of passing tomorrow. And sometimes even the predators feared each other. Hyenas would flee when saber-toothed cats arrived. Wolves gave way to bears. And humans? Well, they had to know which predator was hunting that night. Guess wrong, and your campfire might just light the way to your own disappearance. This was the rhythm of life: gather, eat, watch the sky, wait for the dark. Then pray you weren't the one the hunters picked. And that's how every night felt during the Stone Age. Like a gamble against the teeth in the dark. The air was thick with stillness. You could feel it on your skin like pressure before a storm. Every rustle in the grass wasn't just a sound. It was a warning. And sometimes, the rustle meant they were coming. Out of all the predators that haunted the ancient world, none inspired more fear or fascination than the saber-toothed cats. And chief among them, Smilodon fatalis. It sounds like a name from a metal band, but Smilodon was very real. This was not your average big cat. Imagine something built like a lion on steroids, with a wrestler's frame and two serrated canines protruding from its mouth like twin daggers. Those teeth could reach up to 11 inches. That's longer than a kitchen knife. And the terrifying part? Those blades weren't made for chewing. They were made for one thing, puncturing. But here's the twist. Despite its monstrous teeth, Smilodon probably didn't chase prey like a cheetah. It was a stalker, an ambusher, and that made it even more dangerous to early humans, who often walked right into its trap without realizing it. The cat would wait, motionless, hidden in tall grass or behind a rock, its bulk low to the ground. Then it would explode forward, like a living avalanche of claws, muscle, and fury. Some believe Smilodon targeted the throat or belly with those massive fangs. One bite and it was over. Which means if a human encountered one of these beasts, especially alone, they didn't have long to scream. And here's a strange detail. Their teeth were actually a bit fragile. Despite their size, the saber-like canines could break if the cat bit into bone. That suggests Smilodon was incredibly precise, slicing through flesh but avoiding the skeleton. Imagine the evolutionary confidence it takes to evolve a weapon that can only be used carefully and still dominate. Now picture a young hunter crouched behind a boulder with a wooden spear tracking a deer. He doesn't know that a saber-toothed cat has been tracking him. Maybe the wind shifts. Maybe there's a shadow where there shouldn't be. And then it's over. The only thing left behind is a shattered spear and drag marks in the dirt. This was the brutal chess game early humans played with predators. One wrong move and you weren't the hunter, you were the headline. Smilodon wasn't the only problem though. There were other saber-toothed felines, Mecharodus, Homotherium, even regional variants like Xenosmalus, which had shorter, broader fangs and looked like it could punch its way through a bison. It was like the cat family had a phase where they all decided to go full horror movie. And they didn't just haunt the plains of North America. Similar cats were spread across Europe, Asia, and parts of Africa. Wherever early humans went, there were claws waiting. You might wonder, why didn't humans just avoid areas where these beasts lived? Good question. The problem is humans and saber-toothed cats liked the same places: river valleys, water holes, areas rich with grazing prey. So avoiding the cats meant avoiding dinner. And starving. So they adapted. Some groups learned to move in tighter formations. Others began building higher platforms to sleep on. There are even signs of early alarm systems. Tied bones or shells that would rattle if disturbed. Nothing says survival like inventing the first home security system using old turtle shells. And the psychological toll? Imagine growing up in a world where every rustle in the grass could be your last. Where children were told bedtime stories not about monsters but about real animals with names you couldn't even pronounce. You can see this reflected in the art. Ancient carvings often exaggerate fangs, eyes, and claws. These weren't just animals. They were symbols. Warnings. There's also evidence that some prehistoric humans respected these predators, maybe even feared them in a spiritual sense. Some bones of saber-toothed cats were found placed intentionally near human dwellings, almost like trophies. Or maybe offerings. Here's something else you probably didn't expect. Scientists believe saber-toothed cats may have roared like lions, or worse, made guttural, coughing barks that echoed through the valley like thunder. Now imagine hearing that while collecting firewood. And just when you think things couldn't get worse, remember this. Smilodon weighed up to 600 pounds and had 4 limbs as thick as fence posts. If one decided you were in the wrong place at the wrong time, no amount of running was going to help. So how did humans fight back? They got clever. Spears became longer. Some were fire-hardened. Rocks were placed around camp perimeters to discourage ambushes. In some cases, bones of large cats show signs of being fractured by repeated blunt force trauma, possibly clubs or thrown stones. Humans may have fought back in small groups using coordinated tactics to overwhelm even the fiercest feline. And fire, always fire, remained their greatest weapon. Smilodon may have had power, but it feared flame. So at night, the human circle glowed like a fragile fortress surrounded not by walls, but by flickering sparks. Still, many didn't survive. Every generation lost someone to the dark. And every time a saber-toothed cat dragged a hunter away, the survivors learned. They mourned. Then they adapted, because that's what made humans different. The predators had instincts. Humans had memory, and that memory? It became legend, myth, strategy, and eventually a reason to pick up a sharpened stone and fight back. It wasn't just the sleek, stealthy predators that haunted the dreams of early humans. Some dangers didn't creep up from behind or pounce from the shadows. Some dangers announced themselves. They thundered across the plains, shook the trees, and made the earth groan beneath their weight. These were not hunters in the traditional sense, but they were just as deadly. They were the giants. Take the short-faced bear, for example, Arctodus simus. Just saying the name sounds like a spell you shouldn't say out loud in a cave. This monster wasn't your average honey-loving forest dweller. It stood over 11 feet tall on its hind legs and weighed nearly a ton. That's roughly the size of a compact car, except this one had claws and could run at speeds estimated around 40 miles per hour. That's faster than most humans can sprint. And did we mention it could do this while looking you in the eye from 10 feet up? The short-faced bear had long limbs and an awkward gait, almost like it was built in a rush. But that body gave it one serious advantage: speed over open ground. It didn't need to be stealthy. It was the stampede. It wasn't always hunting, either. Scientists suspect it may have been an opportunistic killer or even a hypercarnivorous scavenger. meaning it was perfectly happy stealing kills from anything, including early humans. Imagine you're part of a group that's just brought down a bison after a grueling 2-day stalk. You've started preparing the meat, feeling proud, even safe. Then over the hill lumbers this enormous, moody bear with jaws big enough to fit your head inside. It growls once, and that's it. The kill is his now. And if you don't drop everything and back away, well, you'll be dessert. And here's a lesser-known but equally terrifying detail. Some cave sites show cut marks on bear bones, suggesting humans sometimes hunted them. Let that sink in. At some point, someone looked at a bear the size of a horse and thought, yeah, I'll fight it. The Stone Age was full of bravery, stupidity, or possibly both. But bears weren't the only megamenaces roaming the ancient world. Let's talk about Pachycracoda brevirostris, a hyena the size of a lion. Its name may sound like a fancy pasta dish, but this beast was no joke. It was the largest hyena to ever live, with crushing jaws strong enough to pulverize elephant bones. It likely didn't hunt like a cheetah. It waited, watched, and then swooped in to destroy anything weakened or distracted. And unlike today's giggly, scavenger hyenas, these beasts may have operated in smaller, more aggressive packs, less cackling, more clobbering. Their territory overlapped with human camps across Eurasia. Imagine sitting by your fire, thinking the danger had passed, and suddenly hearing a bone snap in the darkness, not yours yet, but close. To the ancient mind, these were not animals. They were walking disasters. And just when you thought the land was bad enough, let's remember that some megafauna could switch from prey to predator on a bad day. Take Glyptodon, the massive armored relative of the armadillo. Normally, you'd think it's just a mobile boulder, right? But try taking one of its young, or getting too close during mating season, and you might find yourself flattened by several tons of prehistoric road rage. Another odd case? The entelodonts, or hell pigs. Now, technically these weren't pigs and they weren't from hell, but they absolutely looked like it. Think of a boar on stilts with the face of a crocodile and the attitude of a caffeine-fueled biker gang. Fossils suggest they were omnivorous, but with bone-crushing jaws and a known tendency for cannibalism, early humans knew to stay well away. Unless they had to go near. And when food was scarce, they had to. There's even some evidence, though still debated, that humans may have had run-ins with juvenile Deinotherium, a cousin of the elephant with downward curving tusks that looked like they were designed by a toddler with a crayon. While generally not aggressive, anything that large can become deadly if startled. And prehistoric humans were great at startling things. Usually by accident. So how did our ancestors cope with these tank-sized threats? Observation. They watched the herds. They learned migration patterns. They read footprints and feces and broken branches. They knew when a watering hole belonged to the short-faced bear, and they simply went thirsty elsewhere. In some regions, they avoided entire valleys during certain seasons, preferring the safety of higher ground even if it meant colder nights and thinner prey. And when push came to shove, they prepared. They built stone walls, crude, yes, but enough to slow down something charging. They learned to work as a team. You've probably seen those slow-motion scenes in movies where a group surrounds a beast and throws spears. That actually happened. Spears weren't just for offense. They were defensive fences with sharp points. Some tribes even used natural terrain to their advantage, positioning camps near cliffs or narrow passes where larger animals couldn't maneuver. Because when you're sharing the same land as a bear that can swat a tree in half, real estate location really matters. Here's a strange trick they may have used. Urine. Some predators mark territory with scent, and humans started doing the same. By mimicking the behavior of dominant animals, they might have tricked beasts into staying away. The Stone Age had no deodorant, but apparently, it had some very creative uses for bodily fluids. Humans couldn't outfight every giant, but they could outthink them. And sometimes all it took was one survivor to remember the lesson. One voice around the fire to say, "Don't walk the northern path this month." That's when the big ones wake up. Because against the giants, knowledge wasn't power, it was protection. And over time, those terrifying encounters turned into stories. The giant bear became a symbol. The hyena became a demon in tribal myths. The hell pig, it became a cautionary tale about greed, or pride, or eating too loudly in the middle of the night. Our ancestors faced them all, not with bullets or steel, but with stones, fire, teamwork, and the sheer stubborn will to live another day. There's a strange kind of safety humans feel on flat ground. We look forward, side to side, maybe behind, but rarely up. In the Stone Age, that was a mistake. Because sometimes, death didn't prowl through the bushes. Sometimes, it came screaming from the sky. Let's talk about the most terrifying aerial threat our ancestors ever faced, Haast's eagle. If you've never heard of it, imagine a bird with a wingspan up to 3 meters, about 10 feet, talons the size of a tiger's claw, and a dive-bombing speed that could rival a sports car. This was not a birdwatcher's dream, it was a prehistoric nightmare. Haast's eagle once ruled the skies over what is now New Zealand. It's believed to have hunted moa, a flightless bird that stood taller than a grown man and weighed several hundred pounds. If a bird can bring that down, imagine what it could do to a 5 feet 5 inches human with no helmet and a loincloth. The eagle didn't peck. It pierced. With talons that could punch straight through bone and a hooked beak designed to tear flesh, it would strike from above, drive its prey to the ground, and then dismantle it with all the grace of a wood chipper. And it didn't care how long you'd spent sharpening your spear. Now, while Haast's eagle likely didn't see humans as its primary food source, the line between predator and in the wrong place at the wrong time was thin. If a child wandered off, If a person bent down to collect berries without looking up. If the eagle was hungry or desperate, well, dinner had just been delivered, but it wasn't alone. Other massive raptors soared across different parts of the world. In South America, the Argentavis magnificens is believed to have been one of the largest flying birds to ever live, though likely more of a scavenger. Still, a bird that size could send panic through any primitive camp just by circling overhead. In Australia, there's evidence of Dinatoides, a giant eagle that may have had run-ins with early Aboriginal peoples. Their cave paintings often depict large birds with outstretched wings, sometimes larger than the humans themselves. Were these spiritual symbols? Or warnings? One can only guess, but when you're painting a story onto stone walls with red ochre, you're probably not doodling for fun. And here's something wonderfully strange. Some tribes developed early scarecrows. No, not the hay and flannel shirt kind. These were bundles of bones, feathers, and sometimes bright stones arranged on high poles. The goal? Confuse or intimidate birds of prey. Basically, prehistoric anti-air defenses. It may not have worked on all predators, but when you're being hunted from the sky, any trick is worth trying. Now, most of us today only deal with birds stealing fries at the beach. But early humans had to develop an instinct for watching the skies. They trained their children to spot shadows, learned to camp under thick canopies, and some even wore capes or headdresses that made them appear larger from above. If you're trying to avoid being snatched like a rabbit, the illusion of size is everything. And it wasn't just the big birds they feared. Vultures, condors, and even smaller raptors were scavengers with no respect for privacy. If you were wounded and alone, or if your group had a death that went unburied too long, the air would fill with wings before you could blink. To these creatures, humans were just one more part of the food chain. Here's a lesser-known fact. In some regions, prehistoric humans are believed to have mimicked bird calls, not to hunt birds, but to detect them. A returning call meant the coast was clear. No reply meant a predator might be close, listening. It's the Stone Age version of a car alarm, except with feathers. Of course, not all giant birds were predators. Some, like the massive flightless Genornis in Australia, were prey, but they could still fight back. There's evidence that these birds may have stomped or kicked with enough force to shatter bone. So even when humans hunted birds, they often had to treat it like a boss fight. One wrong move and it was the bird doing the butchering. The psychological toll of living under such aerial threat was immense. Imagine cooking by a fire, looking down to check your meat, and then spotting a shadow drift across your hands. It might be a cloud, or it might be your last moment. Even sleep wasn't safe. There are accounts, both oral tradition and archaeological, that suggest some prehistoric groups built raised platforms or even shallow dugouts to rest in during eagle season. Sleep low, stay covered, and never, ever stretch your arms too far from the blanket. And like all threats, these birds became woven into early mythologies. The eagle didn't just represent strength, it became a god, a curse, a trial. A rite of passage for some young warriors was surviving alone in open plains under the very skies where these creatures soared. You can almost hear the advice whispered in a trembling voice: don't run, get low, cover your head, and never turn your back on the sky. In some traditions, to see a giant bird in a dream meant someone close to you would disappear. The symbolism wasn't subtle, and as time passed, the birds grew fewer. As climates shifted and human tactics improved, giants like Haast's eagle faded into extinction. But the fear didn't vanish, turned into caution, into awareness, into knowledge, because that's what humans do best. We remember. We turn terror into tactics. We turn wings into warnings, and we teach the next generation. Look up. Surviving the Stone Age wasn't about being the strongest. It wasn't even about having the sharpest spear. It was about knowing how to stay alive day after day, night after night, in a world that was constantly trying to kill you. So how did prehistoric humans manage to coexist with clawed monsters, fanged ambushers, and birds that could lift a toddler like a sack of potatoes? They watched. They listened. They learned. Survival in the prehistoric world meant becoming part scientist, part strategist, and part paranoid night owl. Every rustle, every footprint, every pile of dung was a clue. If a fresh pile of bear scat appeared near your camp, you moved. If the birds went quiet at dawn, you stayed hidden. The forest had a language, and those who didn't speak it often became part of someone else's breakfast. One of the most important survival skills was pattern recognition. Our ancestors didn't just wander blindly through the wild. They studied the movements of predators. They figured out when certain beasts hunted at dawn, dusk, or during full moons. They tracked migration trails, breeding seasons, and the strange behavior animals exhibited just before a storm or natural disaster. It's even believed some early groups began marking seasons by the return of specific predators. Imagine a Stone Age version of a calendar. The time of the big claw returns with the warm winds. Stay out of the northern glade. Now let's talk about decoys. You might think of decoys as a modern hunting tactic, but prehistoric humans got creative. There are archaeological signs, arrangements of bones, furs, or broken tools that may have served as distraction sites. Essentially, the idea was, if something big and scary is going to attack, let it attack this, not us. In some regions, humans began to use fire not just for warmth, but to shape their environment. They burned strategic areas of brush to reduce cover for stalking predators. Some even used smoke to drive snakes and other lurking creatures out of caves and holes before setting up camp. You can almost hear the conversation. This is a great shelter. Just, let's smoke out whatever might already be living in it first. And then there's one of the most underrated survival tools of the time, noise. We like to imagine prehistoric people as silent stalkers. But at night, they could be surprisingly noisy. Singing, clapping, rattling bones, these weren't party tricks. They were ways to let predators know. We're awake, we're together, and we're not worth the risk. It's basically the Stone Age version of putting up a beware of dog sign. In fact, this may be one of the reasons early humans started using music and rhythm. Drums, flutes, and repetitive chants could help coordinate group movement but also signal strength. A predator might think twice about attacking a group that sounds like an angry thunderstorm. Here's a fascinating and slightly gross detail. There's evidence that humans would sometimes rub animal fat or urine on themselves to disguise their scent. Not just for hunting, but for hiding. If you smelled like something not tasty, or like a predator even bigger than what was nearby, you were less likely to end up on the menu. No cologne. Just ode to please don't eat me. Prehistoric humans also created escape maps, not on paper, of course, but in their minds. Children were taught from a young age, if danger comes from this path, run to that tree. If you hear this call, it means hide. The survival plan wasn't improvised. It was drilled, and when a predator attacked, humans didn't always fight. Often they bluffed, raised arms to look bigger, shouted, hurled stones. Some may have even painted their bodies with patterns that mimicked more dangerous animals. Just imagine a small tribe running at a cave lion, yelling like maniacs, waving burning branches while covered in zebra stripes and ash. Sounds absurd, but it just might have worked. Because here's the truth. Prehistoric humans were rarely stronger than their predators. But they were more flexible, more social, more creative, and, crucially, more willing to learn from pain. Every time a hunter didn't come back, a lesson was passed down. Every close escape became a fireside story, not just to entertain, but to instruct. Remember what happened to Grom? He walked into the valley during the red moon. That's when the big cats hunt. Never walk during the red moon. Over time, the lessons turned into culture. Myths, superstitions, rituals, all woven from the threads of survival. The beast in the woods wasn't just an animal. It was the spirit of chaos, the guardian of territory, the punishment for arrogance. And this belief system had a hidden purpose. It kept people cautious. Even burial rituals reflected fear and respect. Some groups buried their dead with tools or weapons, perhaps not just for the afterlife, but in case something tried to dig them up. Or worse, follow the scent of death back to the living. One particularly haunting discovery? A cave site where human remains were found arranged in a circle, surrounded by sharpened stakes. No one knows for sure why, but maybe, just maybe, it was to warn off something they feared would return. And when humans finally began to gain the upper hand, when their tools improved, their shelters got stronger, and their numbers grew, they didn't forget. The stories remained. The beasts were honored, feared, and painted on cave walls in bright, slashing colors. Because you never forget what almost wiped you out. Even today, traces of that fear linger in us. Our aversion to the dark. The instinct to flinch at sudden movement. The deep, ancient panic we feel when we hear a howl in the night. These are not just fears, they are memories. Genetic echoes of a time when staying alive meant outsmarting monsters every single day. So the next time you camp out under the stars, listen closely. That rustle in the trees, that screech in the sky, is probably nothing, but your ancestors would have run first and asked questions later.